Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. Right off the bat, I should apologize. The sun is doing a thing, and I can't do anything about it. So it's just going to be there for what it is. So if you remember, earlier this year, I did a series of bookshelf tour episodes. I will link the first one down below if you'd like to go down that little rabbit hole. But as I was doing that, I ran across a lot of books that had been on my shelves for a very long time. Some of them, I started working at Borders in, I think, January or February of 2001. And some of the books date back to there. So I wanted to go through my bookshelves and try to pick out some of the books that I have owned for a long time and call these the books that have been on my TBR for the longest, because I have intended to read all of them and just haven't gotten around to them. Because I think having them all in one place in a video will help me think about them and maybe prioritize some. I am not ready to talk about what my 2021 reading goal is, but some of these, not all, you may see come back as part of that. So there's a little bit of a tease for what that is. But so just for criteria's sake, what I am defining this as is a book that has been on my bookshelves as part of my TBR for 15 years or more. Any book that has been on my bookshelves longer than that is in one of these piles right here. They are arranged alphabetically because that's how I pulled them off of the shelf. Now, I don't want this to be a really long video, so let's kind of dive in. And what I'm going to do as I go through is I'm going to determine if this is something that will continue to sit on my shelf and kind of languish and just be something I will get to when I get to, or if it is something I want to prioritize and maybe put a little bit of an emphasis on. So the first one is The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. This is a Booker Prize winner, and you can kind of see there's a staff copy sticker on it. So when this book came out in paperback, the Borders that I was hired at got a copy of it as a promotional thing for an employee to read. Anybody who works in a bookstore knows that occasionally the bookstores will get advanced copies of books or free copies of books, hoping that the staff will read them and promote them. I don't know why a copy of a Margaret Atwood book that had already been out and won a Booker Prize ended up in that category. But as I was doing my training and doing all of my paperwork and everything, this was on the top of the pile, and the person doing the training noticed me kind of looking at it, and they said, if you want it, you can take it, and I took it. So I haven't gotten around to reading it. So this book was released, I believe, in the year 2000, and I got this copy when it was released in paperback a year later. Yes, it is copyright 2000. It is a kind of a little, from what I've heard, it's like a trippy story. I believe there's a novel within a novel, and the novel within the novel is called The Blind Assassin, but it's also about a sister. The Blind Assassin opens with these simple, resonant words. 10 days after the war ended, my sister Laura drove a car off of a bridge. So there's the kind of mystery angle about that. There is the novel within a novel, and a lot of complicated stories weaving together, gradually revealing through their interplay the secrets surrounding the entire Chase family. I have only read one book by Margaret Atwood. It's The Handmaid's Tale, and I've always meant to read another one, but I think I'm going to put the emphasis. I have a second Margaret Atwood book that we're going to get to, and I think I'm going to put the emphasis on that one and not this one. I might put this one in the priority pile as well, just because I've heard really good things about it. But the one that's immediately jumping out to me is Oryx and Crake. Now, this one was released, I want to say in 2003, somewhere thereabout. First Anchor Books edition 2004, copyright 2003. So I snapped this up when it came out in paperback in 2004, but the book itself was released in 2003. And this is something I've heard. It's had a kind of quiet release from what I remember. And not quiet, because it was a Margaret Atwood book. But people really enjoyed it, but it didn't seem to have any kind of lasting impact. But then over time, people keep coming back to this. And it probably helps that Margaret Atwood released books that were sort of quasi-sequels to this. So, but I've heard really good things. Next to The Handmaid's Tale, I feel like this is the book that I hear the most about when it comes to all of the books that Margaret Atwood has published. So this is a stunning blend of prophecy and social satire about Snowman, who remembers when a boy named Jimmy loved an elusive, damaged girl called Oryx and a sardonic genius called Crake. But now Snowman is alone, and as we learn why, we also learn about a world that could become ours one day. So this is about calamitous social change, climate change, and things like that. Things that have probably only proven to be more relevant as we've gotten away from when it was published, kind of similar to The Handmaid's Tale. And that is why this is definitely one that I am going to prioritize. So I'm going to keep it over here, and that is one that I will prioritize. The next one is The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. This is one of the first books that I purchased when I started working at Borders. I had not seen the movie in its entirety at that point because the movie terrified me when I was a child, and I did not see it in its entirety until recently, like within the last 3 years, maybe 4 years, but somewhere in that window. But for some reason, I was very curious about the book, and I purchased a copy, never got around to reading it. I'm sure you all know what The Exorcist is about. I think it is something that I've continued to be very curious about now, that, especially now that I have seen the movie. I would be kind of curious to read the book and see what it's about. So I am going to, I'm going to put this on my priority pile and make that something that I would like to get to at some point. Now, I have 2 books by T.C. Boyle. When I first started working at Borders, I was really concerned with kind of library building and building a really great library. And one thing a lot of people at the time were recommending the Tortilla Curtain by T.C. Boyle. And so I bought it, never got around to reading it. I feel like opinion on T.C. Boyle has kind of flipped since I purchased this, which would have been the early 2000s. But it is something I would still keep on my shelf. I don't feel any urgency to get to it. But so it's about Topanga Canyon is a home to 2 couples on a collision course. Los Angeles liberals Delaney and Kyra Mossbacker lead an ordered sushi and recycling existence in a newly gated hilltop community. And then Mexican illegals Candido and America Rincon desperately cling to their vision of the American dream. And after a freak accident brings them into intimate contact, their opposing worlds gradually intersect in what becomes a tragic comedy of error and misunderstanding. So, I mean, it sounds interesting, but it sounds a little familiar. And from what I've heard about T.C. Boyle, maybe his is not the perspective I would want on this. So it's something I'll keep on my library, but maybe don't need to get to right away. The book that actually put T.C. Boyle on my radar was Drop City, which has nudity on the cover. So I'm going to hold it like this. Not that I'm a prude, but like I said, one of my videos got flagged for language, so I don't want to I don't want to mess with the YouTube gods. And this is something that even people who like T.C. Boyle never talk about this book, but I purchased it when it came out because I remembered interesting reviews of it. And I think so around the time this came out in paperback would be when I purchased the Tortilla Curtain as well, if I can find the copyright date. Copyright 2003, so 2004 would have been when it was released in paperback. This, if I remember right, is about a commune. They go somewhere else. It's a California commune. They go to Alaska, and while they're there, they find young Alaskans who were already in the territory that they have kind of claimed as their own. And as the communities collide and winter sets in, unexpected friendships and dangerous enmities are born as everyone struggles with the bare essentials of life, love, nourishment, and a roof over one's head. I mean, it sounds interesting, but again, I don't think it's something I would need to hurry up to get to anytime soon. Then, I've never read anything by any of the Brontes. The only book I own by any of the Brontes is Jane Eyre, and that's by Charlotte. I purchased this, again, when I first started working at Borders, I was very concerned with like library building and having classics and things like that. And my high school, I think I've mentioned this, did English classes a little bit more like college courses. So I took some really interesting classes like the comic spirit and science fiction and a Shakespeare class. But the end result was that I did not read a lot of the books that most people read in high school, like Jane Eyre. So I feel like I've always been playing catch up. And around the early 2000s, I was really concerned with trying to do that. And, over time, the urgency fell away. I hear mixed things about Jane Eyre, but I do feel like it's a book that I should read and should get to, especially since it has a lot of pop culture references and things like that. So I am going to put this on my priority list. I'm assuming everybody knows what Jane Eyre is about, so I'm not going to get into that too much. Book by Albert Camus, The Stranger. I believe this is also around the same kind of purpose. When I was library building, I was looking at classics and things that I should read. Purchased The Stranger, never got around to reading it, even though it is only small. So this is a book about an ordinary man who unwittingly gets drawn into a senseless murder on a sun-drenched Algerian beach. Camus explored what he termed the nakedness of man faced with the absurd. And this is an author I've been wanting to read for a long time. I know a lot of people have read The Plague this year for obvious reasons. So I am going to put this on my priority list as well. Then we have Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. Now, around the turn of the century, God, that seems like a weird phrase to use, but it's real. Penguin really did these great books of the 20th century, and I was obsessed with them because I really liked the covers. I thought they were just beautiful editions of books, and they were very helpful to me when I was trying to pick books that would be like library builders for classics. So I got this copy of Heart of Darkness, never got around to reading it. I feel like it is something I should read. So, and again, I'm going to assume most people know what Heart of Darkness is about. It's famous on its own, but it also inspired the movie Apocalypse Now in a kind of indirect way. And I am going to put this on my priority list. But I miss these editions. I used to have a bunch of them. Some of them fell off. I just don't know what happened to them. As I moved around, they kind of disappeared. But I really, really love them. Then this is an advanced copy of Rachel Cusk's The Lucky Ones that I got when I was working at Borders. This was scheduled for release in March of 2004. Never got around to reading it. I feel like I haven't... Rachel Cusk is an author who's kind of popped up a little bit, but never really gained a whole lot of traction. I don't feel a whole lot of urgency to get to this one. I believe this is about... The Lucky Ones is haunted by family, the longing for love, the struggle to connect. Rachel Cusk's fourth novel shows her to be writing in the company of masters of the inner life such as Alice Munro and Sue Miller. Here, a young pregnant mother wrestles with an utterly changed life. A new father looks for a sign of the man he used to be. A daughter searches for a lost childhood, and a mother reaches out in bewilderment to a child she can't fully understand. So, and then it compares it to a Robert Altman film, which is interesting. But again, I don't really feel much of a need. So it's not a collection of short stories, and it's not a collection of interconnected short stories, but so it's interesting that it has that kind of fragmented structure with a lot of different characters and storylines. But anyway, point being, don't feel like it's something I need to urgently rush out and read. Okay, now we get into pile number 2. I read A Christmas Carol in, I think, junior high. And then I read A Tale of Two Cities in high school. Don't remember it. Should probably read it again at some point. And then somewhere in the early 2000s, I read Great Expectations and just loved it. And I've always wanted to read more Dickens. And the book that I had kind of picked out to be my follow-up was Bleak House. And then I never got around to reading it. So it's a kind of chunky book. I've heard good things about it. This is the one that I had kind of picked out and said, this is what I will get to. And then I never got to it. And I felt like for a while for summer, I would pick out like a summer reading list and this was always on it and I never got to it. I am famous for being terrible at TBRs, but it is something I really want to get to. So I believe this is about like a lawsuit that goes on for years and years, and it brings up long buried secrets, and it's kind of a little bit of a satire of the time and things like that. I don't actually know too much about the book, so but I do feel like it's one that I want to get to, so it's going on the priority list. And I can tell you right now, this one will also be going on the priority list. It's Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. This is something I did not have to read in high school, but have always been kind of wanting to get around to. And for a while in my early 20s, I had confused it with the science fiction Invisible Man. It was only when I started working at Borders and people needed to pick up books for summer reading that I realized there was another one, and it was this one. But so I purchased it. Again, this was probably part of my library builder obsession in the early 2000s, and I just never got around to reading it. So if you're unfamiliar, this is about a man dealing with racism and the ways in which racism makes him invisible in society. That's probably a very reductive way of explaining this book, but I'm trying to do like quick little bullet points. And I've heard really, really great things about it, and I'm very much looking forward to getting to it. So that is something I would like to prioritize. While I was going through my library building, somebody recommended Ask the Dusk by John Fante to me, and I feel like that's the only time anyone has ever recommended this book to me. A movie version was released with, I think, Colin Farrell and Salma Hayek. Did not see it. Have never gotten around to reading it. I believe it's like a love story. Don't actually remember much about what the book is. Never got around to reading it. I don't feel like I need to get to this anytime soon. No urgency around this, so I'll keep it. It can sit on my shelf, but I don't feel like I need to jump to it anytime soon. I was really excited to read something by Günter Grass. In the early 2000s, I had picked out The Tin Drum. He is a Nobel Prize winner. This is probably the book that he's most famous for, and then I just never got around to him, and then since then, Revelations about Günter Grass have come out. But most significantly, I took a class at Columbia where we had to read The Flounder, and I hated that book so much. I can't even tell you. So that is actually what really backburnered the Tin Drum for me. So, and I believe this is kind of a similar thing that deals with German history. Yes, a profound yet hilarious perspective on both German history and the human condition in the modern world. And The Flounder had a lot of history in it, and I hated it. So I'm going to say, if you have a different opinion, let me know. But I'm not going to prioritize this. I'll keep it, but I'm not going to rush to get to it anytime soon. Then we have The Heart of the Matter by Grahame Greene. Again, you see the Penguin Great Books of the 20th Century popping up. Another beautiful edition of a book. I've read one other book by Grahame Greene, and I'm trying to remember which one it is. The Quiet American is the one that I read, and clearly I don't remember a whole lot about it. I remember enjoying it, but I don't remember much about it. It's been a while now. And I've heard really good things about The Heart of the Matter, but I don't think I need to prioritize it. So I'm going to put this one on my it can sit pile. Then we have Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. This is a Pulitzer Prize winner. I've only read short stories by Hemingway. I've never read one of his novels, and this is clearly a novella. It is a Pulitzer Prize winner, and I'm doing a Pulitzer Prize project, and I have always felt like I need to read more Hemingway, so I am going to put this on my priority pile. Hopefully it'll be easy to get to. And if you're unfamiliar, it's about a man fighting with a fish. And lots of metaphor go along with it. That's very reductive, but I'm trying to be fast here. I also have Hemingway's A Moveable Feast. I believe this one is nonfiction about his time in Paris. It was published posthumously. It is his classic memoir of Paris in the 1920s, and it has so many characters like F. Scott Fitzgerald, Gertrude Stein. I'm going to put it on my priority list, but if I had to choose, I would go with The Old Man and the Sea. But Moveable Feast is something I feel like I really, really need to get to at some point. Oh, this is going on my priority list too. It's Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. This again was part of my library building. Never got around to reading it, and I've heard a lot of good things about it, particularly recently. And I really need to get to it. So priority list. Oh boy, my priority list is going crazy. The Known World by Edward P. Jones. This is a Pulitzer Prize winner. I believe Doris from Aldi Books read this and loved it. And it's one that I've always wanted to read but never got around to. It's about slavery and all the moral complexities that go along with it. I believe it has a freed slave who owns slaves. I could be wrong about that, but it's something that I've heard really good things about since it won the Pulitzer. I've obviously bought it because it was a winner of the Pulitzer Prize. But yeah, so this is going on my priority list. Now we have On the Road by Jack Kerouac. Again, we go back to the great books of the 20th century and this lovely edition. I have long felt that I should read this book, but not been excited about reading this book. I went to high school when I lived in San Francisco, and people described it as it's not necessarily a quintessential San Francisco book, but because Jack Kerouac is so tied to San Francisco in a certain way, people would always recommend it to me, and then I just never got around to reading it. So part of that is a little bit of resistance on my part. Should I put it on my priority list? I'm going to say no. My priority list is already getting kind of big, and like I said, at some point, I do want to read this book, and I don't feel much of an urgency to do so, and I feel like there are other books I'd rather get to first. If you want to change my mind, feel free to give it a shot. The comments are down there. Let me know why I should change my mind. Then we have Women in Love by D.H. Lawrence. This was, again, part of my library building. I have seen the movie since I purchased the book, but never got around to this. So this is about, so they're sisters, Ursula and Gudrun, and there are friends, and I'm forgetting their names. I'm forgetting, maybe it'll be here. I don't see it on the thing. But they become entangled, and it deals a lot with the socio-political climate of the time. In the movie, there's a sort of homoerotic relationship between the two men. And, I am going to put this on my project list because I don't love the movie, but I think there's a lot of interesting things going on in it, and maybe the book will clarify some of those. So, but I feel like on my priority list, it's low priority on my priority list, but it is something I would like to get to. And D.H. Lawrence is an author that I have never read, so there it goes. Now, this, I mentioned, this was one of the books that showed up when my father sent me books that he had been storing for me in his house. It's Mailman by J. Robert Lennon. I don't know anybody else who knows this book. But when it came out, one of the employees at Borders really recommended it, just gave it a really strong recommendation, convinced me I should buy it and read it, and I bought it, and I never got around to reading it. I believe it's about a mailman who, and part of why is that now I've gotten tired of stories about white men who can't get their life together, and it's kind of that. So this guy who is a 30-year veteran of the Nestor, New York post office, and his life is kind of unraveling. He has a bit of a nervous breakdown, and everything spirals from there. I don't feel like I need to prioritize this book, especially since I don't really know anybody else who knows that this book exists. But it is something that has been on my TBR for a very long time. This book was published in 2003. So it's going to continue to sit on my shelf. Hopefully I'll get to it someday, but I don't feel any urgency to get to it. Then we have Martin Dressler by Stephen Millhauser. This was recommended to me by somebody. Well, actually, no. It was recommended based on the fact that I read Stephen Millhauser's Dangerous Laughter and loved that book. And it is a Pulitzer Prize winner, so it is part of my Pulitzer Prize project. But I feel like there are other books that are part of the Pulitzer Prize project that I would like to get to before I get to this one. So I'm not going to put it on my priority pile. Yeah, that seems fair. So now we get to Half a Life by V.S. Naipaul. I had a copy of this book, went on vacation, took it with me, and had started it on the plane and lost my copy. So I picked up another copy. This is actually the copy that I purchased in Mexico to replace it. And because I had lost the copy and there was a lag, I never got back to it, and I really need to do that. And V.S. Naipaul is a Nobel Prize winner. This, I believe, is the book of his that most people point to and recommend. So I believe it's about the caste system, which is something that I used to be very fascinated, and I still find it fascinating. So I'd like to get back to this at some point. Will I prioritize it? I'm going to say yes, especially since I did start it and never finished. I feel like I've left this one dangling, so I'm going to put that on my priority pile. This is going on my priority pile. It's The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor. Now, this had been recommended to me by somebody I worked with at Borders, because most of the books that I was doing my library building project were white authors and things like that. So aside from Their Eyes Were Watching God and Invisible Man, like the obvious choices. So I asked somebody else to recommend something else to me, and she just walked to the bookshelf in the African American literature section, pulled this off, and handed it to me. And somewhere along the way, I lost the copy. So this is not the copy that I had back then. I lost my copy, and it bounced back onto my priority list when I found out. I had all these years, I did not know that there was an LGBTQ angle in the book, and that kind of bounced it back, and I repurchased a copy. So this is not the copy, but I'm including it because of that technicality, because it was put on my radar at least 15 years ago, and I just never got around to it. But I am going to include it on my priority list. I feel like this might be something I try to do in June when I do my focus on LGBTQ books. So, priority list. July by Tim O'Brien. When was this released? I picked it up. So this is copyright 2002. The paperback would probably have come out in 2003. I read The Things They Carried in the early 2000s and loved it. So when this came out, I purchased it when it came out in paperback, never got around to it. I believe it's about a high school reunion. Yes, the 30th anniversary of Minnesota's Darlton Hall College, class of 1969, and the people come back together. It's almost Big Chill-ish, I guess. I say, having not ever seen the movie Big Chill, so that's probably a bad idea. It's interesting, but even among Tim O'Brien books, I feel like there are others I would probably prioritize before this one, so I'm going to not put it on my priority pile. Going After Cacciato, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is one of the Tim O'Brien books I would probably rather get to. I never really hear people talk about this one too much, but it was assigned to high schools in the area where I was working in Borders, and I feel like it's probably the likely successor to The Things They Carried. If you're going to read something else by him, I will put this on my priority pile. So this is also about Vietnam, similar to The Things They Carried, a blend of reality and fantasy about a young soldier who one day lays down his rifle and sets off on a quixotic journey through the jungle, from the jungles of Indochina to the streets of Paris. Okay, I'll put it on my priority pile. 1984 by George Orwell. I've read Animal Farm, and that's it. And I don't think during the Trump era I would want to read 1984. But, since the Trump era is likely ending, he still hasn't conceded, but since it's likely ending, maybe it's a good time to revisit. I don't know. I'll put it on my priority pile, but with that caveat that, like, maybe this isn't a good time still. I assume everybody knows what 1984 is about, and this was absolutely part of my library building project back in the early 2000s. So, yeah, maybe I'll get to that finally, once and for all. Oh, The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. So I read Midnight's Children, and I don't remember if it was in high school or college, but I think it was actually in college for a class that I took at Columbia. But I had always been intending to read The Satanic Verses first, and then because of that class, Midnight's Children is the one that got put in front of me. I remember liking Midnight's Children, but I don't like Salman Rushdie. So that puts us in a weird place. I am going to put it on my priority pile, which is now massive, just because it feels like this would be a good one to check off, and it is kind of a classic, and it started the whole Salman Rushdie legacy. Obviously, famously, there was a fatwa declared against him because of that book. And the last book that has been on my TBR for longer than 15 years is Raise High the Roof Beam, Carpenters, and Seymour, an Introduction. If you follow along at all, you know that The Catcher in the Rye was my favorite book as a teenager. I walked around with it as if it was my Bible. I obviously read Franny and Zooey, which I need to reread because I've only read it once, and I've never reread it. So I need to go back to that one. And I need to reread Nine Stories. I read it a bunch of times when I first read it, but it's been a really long time. The only book I never got around to is this one, and I am going to put it on my priority pile because I feel like that will complete. There's a sense of completion here if I get to that. Quick update, because I missed one. When I went to put the books back in my library, I found this on the floor. So Fugitive Pieces by Anne Michaels is another book that has been on my TBR for over 15 years, and it is going on my priority list. I believe this is a Women's Prize winner back before I knew what the Women's Prize was. It's supposed to be a sad book, a devastating book. It was basically put in my hands by someone, a friend of my father's, who said, you absolutely need to read this book. And then I purchased it, but never got around to it. So this one is also going to be on my priority list. So to recap, the books on my priority pile are going to be Raise High the Roof Beam, Carpenters by J.D. Salinger, The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie, 1984 by George Orwell, Going After Cacciato by Tim O'Brien, which I may be mispronouncing, The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor, Half a Life by V.S. Naipaul, Women in Love by D.H. Lawrence, The Known World by Edward P. Jones, Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, A Moveable Feast by Ernest Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, Bleak House by Charles Dickens, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, The Stranger by Albert Camus, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë, The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, and Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood. So some of these, not all, may pop up as part of my 2021 reading goal when I am ready to finalize the details around that and talk about it. If you have thoughts about any of these books, let me know. If you want to seek justice for one of the books that I am not prioritizing, let me know. If you think I should rethink one of the books that I am prioritizing, let me know that as well. You know what to do. Comment section is down there. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.